Shannon Minnick. This is Three Questions with Shannon. And thank you for joining us. And also thank Annie Tulkin for joining us as well. Annie is the founder and director of Accessible College. And Annie, I guess I met you maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe it's been a good little while, and I've been watching you and seeing all the great things that you have been doing in the disability community. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll jump right into the three questions?
Sounds good. I am prepped and ready for those three questions too. So I'm Annie Tulkin. I am the founder and director of Accessible College. At Accessible College, we provide college transition support and preparation for students with physical disabilities and health conditions. So that could be a student who uses a wheelchair or a mobility device, along with students who have health conditions like diabetes, lupus, other autoimmune disorders, anything that kind of impacts the student's functioning in the educational setting. And the reason that I started this business is because I used to be the associate director at Georgetown University's Disability Support Office. And I noticed that there were so many students who were coming into college really unprepared to self-advocate, and they really didn't understand kind of what types of accommodations they might need in the college setting, what types of things they could request. And so I started Accessible College to help bridge those gaps. And right now, too, Accessible College has a program with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, which I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, where students with paralysis, and it could be any type of paralysis, can work with me for free through the Reeve Foundation on that transition to college. And students could be any age. So it could be a student who's in high school, or an adult who is paralyzed in some way and wants to return to school or is thinking about it. So I'd highly recommend that folks check that out too. And you can find information on the Reeve Foundation website or on my website, which is accessiblecollege.com.
Awesome. So Annie, I know that we here at Independence Now, we serve Prince George's and Montgomery County, but Christopher Reeves is a national organization. So does that mean nationally you're helping people?
Yeah, so while I'm located in Silver Spring, Maryland, here in Montgomery County, I work nationally. So I work with people all over the place. And so for the Reeve Foundation program too, that's available to anyone in the United States. So if anybody knows a student with paralysis, doesn't matter if they live in Prince George's or Montgomery County, they can take advantage of that program as well. I also wrote a transition guide specific to transitioning to college with paralysis, and it's available on the Reeve Foundation website as well. So if people are just interested in kind of like looking at that and seeing what points are brought up, I think it's the only transition guide to college for students with paralysis that exists. And it gives kind of helpful tips on just things students should be thinking about, kind of considerations they should have when they're doing the college search, and things they should be aware of once they get to college as well. So that could be helpful for some folks too.
That's awesome to know that it's nationally and not just in, Prince George's and Montgomery County.
Yep.
So let's start with our three questions. I know I already asked you a question, but it wasn't part of the three questions. So Annie, how has access to higher education changed over the years in terms of reform, accommodations, accessibility, and/or support resources?
It's a great question. It's also a really, really tricky question. I knew these three questions were going to be hard. Okay, so how have things changed? So in some ways, college has become more accessible, right? So more students with disabilities are going into college. We know from national data that 19% of undergraduate college students have disabilities, and that includes students with learning disabilities, with ADD, autism, mental health conditions, physical disabilities, chronic health conditions. And that 19%, those are just the students who have gone to the Disability Support Office and requested accommodations. So it's really probably quite likely that there's another 19 or 20% who either doesn't realize they might qualify for accommodations, or they've decided they don't want to request a college accommodations in the college setting.
Or they don't know that they could.
Right. So there's that big piece too. So they might not realize that their condition, impacts them, and they could request accommodations. And so students with disabilities are there. I think that's like the biggest thing that I always like to tell people. Whether or not the data shows it, we know that they're there. And then the other piece of that too is that there are more and more students with disabilities going into college, right? And that's because of IDEA and the ADA. And I mean, we're at 31 years of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act this year. And so in many ways, things have become more accessible. I say that, but I also want to say, like, there are still barriers. as people watching this probably know. And so when we talk about, how things have changed in higher ed, there's a baseline of accommodations that colleges provide, but then there are some schools that go above and beyond what that baseline is and provide, more supports and services. And then there's another level on top of that of schools that have specialized programs for students with learning disabilities, with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and with autism. So the scope is wide, and accommodations and supports really vary from college to college. So if you've seen, and person to person too. And so if you've seen one college, you've seen one college, right? And that's why we really want to make sure that students and families are actually interacting with the disability support offices prior to signing that dotted line to go to school there, and asking questions, seeing what types of accommodations are typically available at that school, looking at the student's needs more holistically, and starting to break down, is this school going to work for my student or for me? And so that's why it's a tricky question, because yes, things have changed over time, but there are still really big variations in what colleges and universities provide. So I want to make sure that we're driving that home. And we should also say, Shannon, too, that we're not just talking about like four-year colleges. It could be a community college, could be a vocational training program. Any program that receives federal funding has to provide accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which you will probably hear Shannon and I talking about a lot. But the ADA provides for reasonable accommodations, and I'm doing air quotes because reasonable accommodations sometimes leaves some flexibility for the school to determine what is reasonable in that program. And that's where I think people get a little bit confused, because it might not be exactly the same things that you received in the high school setting.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same, because in high school you have an IEP that follows you and it says what you need and everything. And when you go to college, you don't have that IEP. So you have to know what to ask for and how to ask for it. So it's great to reach out to something like Accessible College to have all the information that you need to be successful in school.
Yeah, so a lot of the students and families that I work with come to me sophomore, junior, senior year of high school to start to think about, what questions do I need to be asking when I'm visiting colleges? What things should I be preparing for in terms of independent living skills? Stuff like that, so that they're actually making a good choice, because you're a consumer, like you're buying a product when you go to college. A lot of people don't think about it that way. They think the college is selecting me, but it's a 50-50 relationship.
And it's expensive, so you want to make sure you're getting the most out of your experience. Yes.
But Shannon,
let's move to our next question.
Wait. One quick thing. I do want to mention that there is federal legislation right now called the RISE Act that is in Congress, that is working towards having IEPs transition over to the college setting. And people should do their own research and look at kind of what the pros and cons are related to that. There's a lot of debate in the education community, but I just wanted to make sure that people knew that that's something that, is being discussed and talked about.
That's great. And I think, people need to know that because we need to be a part of that decision. We need to make sure that they know that this is what we need. If it's something that you need and you're not speaking up about it and voicing your opinion, then most likely it won't happen.
Yep. In the true Center for Independent Living, history, nothing about us without us. And
Yeah.
and so, it's important that people know kind of what legislation is out there, what's being discussed. And that's why I felt like it was important to bring it up here.
And if you don't know, reach out to Accessible College, reach out to your nearest Center for Independent Living. There's 400 centers in the country. So there's one near you. So our next question, what are some of the most valuable and important resources available to people with disabilities who wish to attend college?
Yeah. So there are a lot of resources, and sometimes it can be really overwhelming. So every state has a transition guide through their high schools, right? So there's usually that's kind of a good baseline of figuring out what do I need to be thinking about. A lot of times, if a student has an IEP, an individualized education program, theoretically, they're also having a conversation with that IEP team and their transition coordinator about what their next steps are for transitioning out of high school and into college. It's different at every school. We know that sometimes schools maybe don't do as good of a job as they could be doing. So there is some independent research that's probably required in this area. So check out your state's transition guide as a starting point. Then the other thing that people can do is start to look to condition specific resources. So for example, if a student has diabetes, there's a wonderful network called the College Diabetes Network. And you can go to their website and you can sign up for their transition guides that are free. And they have one for parents, one for students, of considerations and things you should be thinking about when you're transitioning to college with diabetes, because there's a lot of moving parts in that area. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation also has transition to college guidelines and supports. I mentioned that Reeve Foundation transitioning to college with paralysis guide that I helped create. So whatever condition you have or conditions you have, health conditions or physical disabilities, there might be a specific guide that you can look for online related to that condition and going to college. So that's really great. Also, for people with physical disabilities, United Spinal recently put out last year a 20 wheelchair-friendly colleges guide, which just kind of highlights 20 different schools that students have gone to and had great success with, and they're all chair users. And it also gives firsthand accounts of student experiences at those schools. And so that's another really great resource too, that, well specific to wheelchairs, can also be great for anybody with any sort of mobility impairment, to just kind of get the juices flowing of thinking about, okay, what do these schools have? What types of supports are they offering that might be different from other colleges, or what considerations should I be making? So I would say, starting with your state's transition guide, looking at condition-specific resources that might be available online. And then the third thing is connecting with Voc Rehab in your state as early as possible, yesterday. Because depending on the state, vocational rehabilitation might provide services and supports. Often they work on, directing towards employment, but sometimes they'll also provide funding for education. They might pay for your books. They might provide assistive technology support. So if you're eligible for that, you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of it. And a lot of times people don't always know that that is a resource to them. For example, I have some students who I work with who have physical disabilities, and in their high schools here in Maryland, here in Montgomery County and Prince George's, they don't have IEPs. They have 504 plans. Students with 504 plans don't get any transition planning. So no one is connecting those students with vocational rehabilitation or with the Center for Independent Living. So I always make sure that those students understand that they can connect with Voc Rehab and potentially get services, funds, supports to assist them in higher education. And I think that that's a really critical piece that sometimes gets missed. So
Yes,
I want to make sure we
definitely.
highlight that.
That was a great answer. I was going to touch a little bit on pre-ex, but you already have, so thank you. So your third question.
Uh-oh, yeah.
What work still needs to be done to make colleges more accessible?
It's a fantastic question too, right? So I think we need to move towards, and this is me, I'm not working at a college, like this is my pipe dream, my fantasy. We need to work towards having more universal design for learning, right? So a lot of times we talk about universal design in terms of physical accessibility. That's where, at least maybe you and I talk about that. I don't know if everybody else does.
Yes.
The universal design in a physical sense is like creating spaces that work for everyone to use. So it might be having a ramp that everyone travels up so that people with strollers, people in wheelchairs, people with mobility impairments can all access the same things and things like that. Universal design for learning is a similar concept, so that you're giving a classroom experience that meets the needs of all the learners in that classroom. So that might mean recording that session, providing notes to everyone in the classroom, giving students different options or opportunities for presentations. Maybe some students are handing in papers, some students are giving oral presentations, some students are delivering on videos, but really giving a range of experiences that help students so that they don't have to request accommodations for that class. That's kind of like the dream, and there are a lot more
That is
colleges.
the dream.
There are a lot more colleges and just educational settings in general that are looking more at universal design for learning, which is a thing. You can Google it and see it.
It's something like I've never heard universal design for education, so thank you for that.
Yep.
But the thing about that is it makes it, easier for individuals with disabilities to not feel shamed and uncomfortable with asking teachers for certain things, because we want to be treated equally, and to ask sometimes is a hardship on the individual that needs the support.
Yeah, the current system of requesting accommodations in the high school setting, it's a little bit different, but in college, you actually have to go through the process to request accommodations through the disability support office. Then once you're approved, you still have to go on and talk to each of those professors. So the onus is on the student to have to consistently self-advocate. And for students, a lot of times who have invisible disabilities, so things that people can't see, sometimes people don't take them seriously, right? That's a thing that happens. I don't see anything wrong with you, so everything's fine. That's something that sometimes, comes up for students. And also that issue of self-advocacy fatigue, right? Of constantly having to re-advocate over and over and over again for something that should just work and happen. And that can be really exhausting. And I think that's where a lot of students with disabilities, have a lot of trouble, is kind of having to re-advocate and re-advocate and re-advocate, and you run out of energy.
Yeah.
And a lot of people talk about it in terms of spoon theory, of having a certain amount of spoons at the start of the day, and then you're doling out your spoons. By the end of the day, you have no energy left. I often tell students, like, get on Twitter and there's like #Spoonie, and you can check out all the people who have chronic health conditions and physical disabilities who are talking a lot about spoon theory and about how exhausting it is to have to advocate and re-advocate and over-advocate for everything all the time.
Yeah. This is amazing. Every time I talk to you, I always learn something new. And I'm well versed. I'm a person with a disability. I'm in the disability community. I work for Independent Living Center, but every single time I talk to you, I learn something new. So it is such a pleasure to have you on 3 Questions with Shannon. So it was so exciting, and I've learned a lot chatting with you. Is there anything that you want to say to our viewers to end our conversation?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for listening and also tell people if you want more information on what I do, you can check out my website. It's www.accessiblecollege.com. I have a monthly e-newsletter. So if you go to the website, it's down at the bottom left. You can sign up for the newsletter there. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, plugging all my socials. So you can find me there as well. And I'm happy to answer questions or support people or point you to other resources if that's helpful as well.
Great. So this is Shannon Menick and Annie Tulkin. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you need some support in the community, Independence Now, we serve Prince George's and Montgomery County. You can reach out to us at innow.org. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Shannon.